start if we have a quorum. So this is the CCS Executive Committee meeting of January 10th, 2024. And could I get I'm calling to order at 10:01 a.m. on my computer. Could I get a roll call?
Sure. Austin,
Present.
Bertucci,
Present.
Dilger,
Present.
Dombrowski,
Present.
Dorfman, Fulick, and Smith.
Here.
And for CCS, we have Rebecca Malinowski, Deborah Wishmeyer, and Beth Stoneberger.
Okay. Do we have any additions to the agenda? I see Becky
Yes.
joining us now.
Yeah.
Okay, hearing no additions to the agenda, do we have any public comment? Also hearing none, we will move on to the consent agenda. You see some minutes and bills in there, along with the holiday schedule and the employee handbook changes, which were minor enough that we decided to include them in the consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'll
I
make
move.
that motion.
Oh, I can second.
Sorry,
Okay,
Monica.
Bertucci moves, Dombrowski seconds. Could I get a roll call?
Austin,
Yes.
Bertucci,
Yes.
Dilger,
Yes.
Dombrowski,
Yes.
Dorfman, Fulick,
Yes.
and Smith.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Consent agenda passes as presented. So moving on to business, new and potential members. You have some information in your packet. Rebecca, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that?
No, we are looking forward to hosting the project team orientations. And we're excited that we are going to host them together. We think there's going to be some really good opportunities for learning from each other so when we can, we'll be bringing the two libraries together, and when it makes more sense, we're going to be keeping them separate so we can focus on their individual workflows. So we're pretty pumped. Any questions on anything in there?
I was disappointed to see that Schaumburg has put out an RFP, but I remain hopeful that perhaps they will choose Polaris and then decide it makes sense to join us.
Yeah, I mean, they're really big. I mean, I'd be delighted to have them, I'm sure, but just looking at their stats compared to everyone else, they'd be about 50% larger than the next biggest library in just about every metric. So I can see that being a stretch for them. But it was great to speak with them and hear more about their operations and meet their team. So
Okay. And then member engagement summary. Deborah, do you, or Rebecca, what page is that in the packet? I'm still.
Yeah, that is not actually in the packet.
Okay.
I've been putting together some details for you guys to present here, but we didn't send anything ahead of time. So I'll go ahead and share my screen and walk you through what we've got. Okay. Rebecca, can you give me a thumbs up? Can you see my little PowerPoint here? All right. So last month I began looking at some of our metrics on member engagement, specifically attendance at technical and advisory group meetings and training sessions. So we thought it would be worthwhile to take that deeper look at attendance just to see, are we engaging all of our libraries equally? And, do we maybe have some libraries who we're not interacting with on a frequent basis? So I have some data to share with the group today, specifically the initial analysis of attendance at tech and advisory group meetings. So I'm going to walk you through that now. So let's go ahead and get started with technical groups. So just a quick recap on our technical groups. We have 6 of them. It is CAM, CIRC, ILL, PASS, IT, and acquisitions. So I'm kind of breaking them out into two groups for this discussion. Our core advisory groups, CAM, CIRC, ILL, and PASS. And I'm calling these core because every library has staff members whose jobs would fall under these kind of broad buckets. CAM is our catalogers group, circulation is circulation staff, ILL, interlibrary loan, and then PASS is our public services group, both adult and youth services. And then we have two additional technical groups, IT and acquisitions. Now, not every library has a designated IT staff member. We do have several libraries who outsource their IT to groups like OSG. And when it comes to acquisitions, not all of our libraries use the Polaris acquisitions model. So this group isn't necessarily relevant to all of our members. So again, in this little presentation, I'm kind of making a distinction between those two kinds of technical groups. So why do we have technical groups? We use these meetings to share and develop best practices, to engage in continuing education for members, to talk about and approved procedures, workflows, and policy changes. CCS also uses these meetings as a venue to share information about what we're working on, share info about upcoming projects like ILS upgrades, new member migrations, etc. And per our governing board policies, they do specify that libraries should be sending a representative to the applicable groups. So these 6 groups met a combined 20 times in last fiscal year. So that's July of 2022 through June of 2023. I will note all of those groups met virtually. Each group met 2 to 4 times, and most of the meetings were recorded and posted to our YouTube channel. The data that I looked at only analyzed live attendance, so we don't have a way to track YouTube views by library. So again, we're really only looking at who attended the meeting live. All right, so kind of diving into what we found when we looked at this data. On average, we had, or I guess I should say, we had a total of 203 unique staff attending a CCS technical group live in the previous fiscal year. Again, this doesn't account for staff who may have watched the recording after the meeting. And on average, we had 7 unique staff per library attend at least one CCS technical group meeting, but that did kind of range widely by library. We had as few as 2 and all the way up to 12 unique staff attending live. Now, we had really varying attendance rates across all of our groups. And when I'm talking about attendance rates, I'm talking about whether we had at least one person from a library attending every given meeting. So unsurprisingly, CAM's our best attended technical group meeting. Again, that's our catalogers group. They had an 86% attended rate across all of our libraries. So in other words, on average, 86% of libraries attended a given CAM meeting. So that's like we had 24 libraries represented at any given catalogers meeting. So that's, I feel like, pretty good. But then we can see those numbers begin to decline when we look at the other groups. With ILL and CIRC, they saw about 65% attendance rate, and PASS 54% attendance rate. When we look at sort of those additional or extra technical groups, for acquisitions, we had a 60% attendance rate by libraries who use the acquisitions module. Again, this group isn't necessarily relevant to all of our members. And then for IT, we had a 41% attendance rate, but this isn't accounting for libraries who may outsource their IT. I don't have that information now, and so didn't quite dive into that deeper. So when we kind of switch our lens to a library by library view, we did see some significant differences between libraries and how many meetings they were attending. So out of those 4 core technical group meetings, we had 5 libraries that attended over 80%, which is 11 or more meetings. We had 13 libraries that attended between 60 to 80%. So that's between 18 to 10 meetings. And then we had 10 libraries who were present at fewer than 60% or fewer than 8 meetings. So overall, I would say attendance was lower than we had expected, or I had expected. So I'm going to show you the slide. It's kind of a little bit overwhelming, so I apologize for all of the data that is right here, but I think it kind of helps show the attendance by library. So when we look at this table on your screen, we have the library name in the left-hand column. And then in the center here, we have each of our technical groups, and then how many times or how many meetings that individual library went to in the previous fiscal year. And the advisory groups marked with the star at the top are the ones we're considering to be core. So just heads up here. Then we have the grand total of how many meetings total that library was present at. And then in the far right, we have like the percent attendance. So you can see we have some libraries like Algonquin, they sent at least one staff member to every core technical group and were present at about 85% of total advisory groups, or technical groups. But then we do have some libraries who, have an attendance rate that is below 50%. So I think our ultimate goal would be to increase attendance and to kind of encourage greater participation in these groups. So when we take a look, I should pause and see if anyone has any questions. I'm like running through the data. Anyone have any questions so far? No? Okay, stop me if something comes up in your brain, and we'll have a chance to talk about it in just a second. So kind of flipping over to our advisory groups, we have 4 advisory groups. They're database management, circulation ILL, scrap, and UX. Advisory groups are more of focus groups than the larger technical groups. Staff volunteer for the groups. They're either self-nominated or nominated by their directors. These groups consult with CCS, again, on potential system configuration changes. They help us research and test software changes, and they help us recommend policy and workflow changes to their corresponding technical groups. So they're kind of like focus groups that we bounce ideas off, go to for advice and insight. So in fiscal year 2022-23, we had staff from 21 different libraries serving on our advisory groups. I will say this number dropped significantly this year. We saw a pretty sharp decline in the number of libraries who volunteered staff. It dropped to 15 for this current fiscal year. We have seen, I think in general, declining participation, likely for several reasons. And I will also say we have, in some of these groups, seen a declining need for major decision-making, which can be a really good thing. We don't have as many items coming to these groups for decisions. Back when we migrated to Polaris, we had lots of stuff that we had to talk out with advisory groups, and things have kind of quieted down over the past couple years. So you can see in this chart, again, sort of this difference between which libraries are going to advisory groups and which libraries aren't. We have, like I noted, I think there's 7 libraries who didn't have a seat on an advisory group last year. That doesn't mean, though, that they weren't able to attend these meetings. We do have lots of staff who attend advisory group meetings as guests, just to participate in discussion and kind of stay in the loop. And we do have some libraries, like I'm going to call it Lake Villa here, that have staff on multiple advisory groups. So you'll see like some greater participation amongst those libraries. So what are we going to do with this data? We've got lots of ideas cooking. Rebecca and I have been talking a little bit about potential next steps. We wanted to bring it to this group today to hear your thoughts and suggestions on how we might move forward. My next step is to look at the data we've gathered so far for this current fiscal year. We did begin meeting in person with a few of our groups. So I'm going to do a check and see, are we seeing the same patterns? Did we see a decrease or increase in attendance when we shifted to in-person? And then we can follow up with libraries individually. I believe Rebecca is planning to potentially put this on the agenda for governing board in February, depending on how this conversation goes today and what this group thinks. We do have a webinar planned for spring to talk about technical advisory groups, to maybe bump up and drive participation and interest in joining them. I think there are a lot of staff, especially with turnover, that don't know what they are. So, we can really, I think, get the word out that these are a great opportunity for staff to get involved and learn. We're also looking at potentially surveying group members to ask, like, what would make these meetings more helpful and useful to you? And then kind of on a higher level, potentially reworking the groups. As I mentioned, we've had a declining need for meetings for some of the groups, particularly a group like database management. We just haven't had requests for policy changes. So, like, for example, last year we canceled 2 of the meetings and they haven't met yet this year because we just don't have items for them to discuss. So we've been talking about whether we want to change up how these groups are structured. So I think, Rebecca, anything to add before we kind of open it up to thoughts?
Yeah, I will just add, I mean, we've had a lot of conversations in the past on whether CCS should be, and I think this is Sue Reinder's language, so that tells you where kind of in the timeline of things we were talking about this, whether CCS should be like a utility where you set it and forget it and you pay your bill and you get your service and you kind of live your life, or if it's a cooperative where, we want to have engagement and collaborative decision making. And, every time we have the conversation, it shakes out that we want to be a cooperative. So, this is part of how we do that, is engaging with our library staff and making sure we're hearing a diverse set of voices. When we're deciding what services to offer, what, how we're going to move forward, what projects we're going to plan for, a lot of that is based on what we hear at the technical group. So if we're hearing, a very limited set of voices at the technical groups, like, that's who is then driving our internal decision making, even in sort of informal ways. So, yeah, I appreciate that Deborah took a look at this, and I do want to hear what this group has to say, particularly if you feel it would be valuable to talk about at governing board with the whole group, or if following up with individual directors would be more appropriate. Yeah, I think that it is really interesting data to see. And I think, as Deborah said, there's a lot of reasons for this. We've had a lot of turnover amongst directors. And, if there wasn't a director in place when we're nominating people for groups, no one got nominated. Like, there's a lot of very legitimate reasons for the variations we see amongst our libraries. So I want to be careful that we're, again, not like trying to call anyone out, but to try to bring people in and say, we'd love for your staff to get involved. I will pause.
I find this a really interesting conversation as well. In some ways, so I think about this as it's like I look at my numbers, and I'm the president of the organization, and yet Palatine's participation is right about 50%. And my first instinct is, it's time to set 2024 goals. I can make my staff, I can make this a goal, and I can say, hey, you guys need to be going to more of these meetings. But at the same time, it goes back to that, what Deborah said about the value, right? I have a lot of other goals for them as well. And if they're not getting any value out of this, I don't know that that's where I want them to spend their time. And when I say that because the low attendance may be a factor of how well CCS functions, right? If everything is working well for me in the database, then I don't feel a need to come to a meeting. So it may be a factor of, everything's going smoothly. I don't have anything to complain about. Why am I coming? So when my one comment for Deborah, I like the idea of a survey, but when you say surveying group members, I think you're preaching to the choir in effect. I think we should be surveying non-attendees as well about value.
Yeah, that's good. Good to note.
Okay, and I'll stop there, see what other people think. Joanna.
I think it does merit a discussion at our full meeting, just as you said, there are so many new directors and, you know, they may not be fully aware of how these groups function or what they are. I really liked, I mean, I know because I'm part of this group and my staff, you know, I think Park Ridge had, you know, a pretty good, almost 80% attendance rate. We have a lot of participation, but I think for our new directors, I think it would be good to just have a conversation and present that data in a way that isn't calling anybody out. But I think it's worth bringing to the whole group.
Monica.
I liked the proposed action plan that Deborah laid out. I joined this consortium in the fall of 2020, in the middle of the pandemic. I never met Rebecca in person until the last board meeting. And she did a good job of orientation, but I don't know what these groups do. I'm just going to be honest. That was not part of what was covered with me at the time because we were all just trying to survive. So I need more information. I know some of my people have some of these meetings on their calendars, but I don't ask questions about that. You know, we're like constantly in firefighting mode, right? So I would love to learn more about what each of the technical groups offers and, you know, what their purpose is. And that would help me, you know, kind of calculate in my mind who maybe should be involved. And then I would be able to, you know, ask questions about that and get more input from my library. I was happy to see that I have people participating. I know, you know, like my Courtney participates and my tech services person, and I know I have people on the advisory boards, but you know, I'm not really sure. That is all still nebulous to me, is I guess what I'm saying. And I've been in my job here for over 3 years. So if that's the case for me, it could be the case for others. So I liked that plan of attack because it was like following up with me individually and saying, oh, hey, here are the people that you have that are participating in what, and do you know what all of these groups do? And then having a larger discussion about, are the groups meeting the needs? Or are they targeting that spirit of cooperative services that we're trying to foster? So good job on the strategy there, Deborah. And I liked seeing the stats and stuff. And I'm definitely in favor of both personal and larger group discussions on this.
I was going to say, I agree with Joanna's insights and feel exactly the same way that Monica does. So, and sorry I'm late. My morning meeting ran long. Sorry, folks.
No problem, Lindsay. Heidi or Becky or Anthony, anything else to add?
I mean, I think that obviously it's a welcome, it's an invitation, right? It's not a shaming, it's not a, you know, so I don't think it can do only good. I think it can only be a good thing. And I think that there will be some libraries that are like, well, we're in a transition right now with our leadership and we have interim management, blah, blah, blah. We'll step up the next time you ask us, right? And it'll all work out. And then even if they don't participate, they're hearing that that's what we're about. So it's great.
Yeah, I was going to say maybe it would seem like I would have more feedback since I've only been a director for not quite 2 years, but I was an internal hire and a former PAS chair. So I'm probably not the one to ask because I was already participating in all of those things. And my library, we're all busybodies and we want to know what's going on. So we're participating in as many of the things that we can. So maybe put it that way. If you want to know what's going on, go to the meetings because that's where you're going to find out things that will affect you later. But I think it's a good plan.
And I'll add that I echo what everyone has said to this point. I agree with you all, and I think there's one thing that we can do is lead by example. As directors, we can set the expectation that we're going to have participation, and we can all agree about that. I do think that peer-to-peer, that's probably the best way to get the engagement. So if there's other, groups that our managers or staff are participating in, that can truly see the value of the networking that comes from this. I think that's really, to drive towards the outcomes is maybe the better way to get the folks involved. I think all the directors will agree that there's a value to have their staff participating in these programs, that it's not that much of a time commitment to be involved. But how do we recruit those people? And how do the staff know that it's going to be a value add for them to attend? So I don't know if there's a way that we can connect peer managers or coordinators or the necessary relevant staff to get engaged. I think that's another element that we need to try to find a way to incorporate. But I do think I agree we should talk about it at governing board.
Thank you all. The
Are
only
the
other
meetings,
thing that
sorry, I just have a quick question. Are the meetings
Mhm.
likely to stay remote for the foreseeable future, or will they switch to being in person at some point? I would think that would affect participation. I don't know
Yeah,
how.
so
Maybe
I
more
think
people would participate if it was in person and they got to go to a different library, or more people do because they can do it remotely.
Yeah, I think our current plan is to try and do at least 2 in person. So like the fall and then like the spring or summer meeting, and then the winter meetings, December through March, keep those virtual just to minimize weather related travel drama. So I think that's the plan. But again, this is really the first year in several years that we've had in-person meetings. So I think we need to look and see what those numbers looked like in comparison to virtual. So we've had some, and Rebecca can chime in. Both of us went to the in-person ones we had. Oh my God, they were so much fun. It was great to see people. People were really excited to see, staff that they haven't seen, some of them
Yeah.
for 3 years since before COVID. So I think there's real value to the in-person engagement for both CCS and for library staff. So I'm anticipating a mix.
Curious.
Okay. The only other thing that I will add, Rebecca, if we're bringing this to governing board, is that I really liked what you said there at the end about Sue Reinder's language, right? Around utility versus collaborative. And I think if we talk about that at the governing board and say, hey, we've had this discussion a number of times and we always land on collaborative, that will keep the discussion from going back to that big picture thing and focus it more on, okay, now that we already all agree that we are a collaborative, how can we address this specific issue about member attendance? Okay, so we will add that to the governing board agenda for next month. Any innovative updates?
There's info in the packet if anyone has any questions. I do want to call out the LEAP month summary for cataloging and serial staff. Rachel wrote a comprehensive report. I included just part of her conclusions in the packet, but it sounds like she got really productive feedback as a result of these activities. So I wanted to call that out and thank all the technical services staff that participated and brought an open and productive mind to the conversation. So that was awesome to see. And then Deborah can jump in with any updates or answers to questions that I missed.
Any questions? Okay, moving on to Find More Illinois. And I don't have on my notes if that's Deborah or Rebecca who's addressing that. Deborah?
Grab that one. So I heard from Rails that they have received back 22 signed agreements. So we're still waiting on those signed agreements from a number of libraries, but they're going to issue a little nudge this week to get those remaining agreements signed and back to them. We've made some good progress on our setup and config, so I'm working with Rails and autographics and innovative staff to figure out all of the many setup options we have. And the next steps are setting up a meeting with all of your library project leads so that we can walk through the anticipated schedule and next steps with them. So we're looking at, again, that kind of phased rollout between May and August of 2024 with a few libraries who have requested later go live dates in 2025. And we'll be training library staff kind of staggered between April and July of this year. So that's something I'll work with your project leads to get on the calendar.
Any questions for Deborah? Okay, moving on to open positions at CCS. Rebecca put something in your packet at the top of page 22. Were there any questions for Rebecca about that? Okay, I will just make a comment that it's good to see that you're having better luck with recruiting and getting a good pool. I'm hopeful we'll start to see that at Palatine too.
There's a lot of libraries hiring right now. Lots of vacancies all over. So good luck to everyone.
And then Deborah also put something in your packet about the Glam Jam that University of Illinois is running. Thanks to Ryan Livergood for alerting us on that. And she sent something out to the Lib admin group earlier this week. I know my library is excited about participating individually. Any questions about that one?
I'm gonna resend it because I sent it like Friday afternoon, so it may have withered in some inboxes. I do want to shout out to Glenview for being our first and so far only volunteer. We've got your Makerspace staff members signed up, so that's awesome. But I will bump it. And if there's not a lot of interest, that's fine. CCS staff will be brainstorming this afternoon on what we specifically want to present about CCS. So, all right, I'm so excited you're signing up, Jeannie. Individual.
Well, let me clarify because we haven't looked into it too closely. So maybe you can help me. Can we sign up just to have conversations, or do we have to do these presentations too? Can we just have one-on-one conversations?
You can just do one-on-ones. Yeah, you don't have to schedule. You get to write your whole own schedule. So if you just open up one-on-one slots, you just open up one-on-one slots.
It's what we're hoping to do. We've got a librarian position open, but we also are anticipating some summer internships, and so we thought this year we'll get on the ball with our summer internships. We're usually behind the ball, so.
Yeah, I will just do a huge shout out to the walkthrough. There's a recorded webinar walkthrough on the publishillinois.edu page. I was very confused about the whole situation. I had already signed up, but I was still very confused until I watched that webinar. That was really helpful to me. So cool.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. So now we need to go into closed session. Could I get a motion for that?
I move. Dombrowski.
Okay, Monica is moving that we move into closed session pursuant to 5 ILCS 120/2C1 regarding the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees of the public body. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
I think Lindsay and Becky spoke up at the
Lindsay
same
can
time. Okay. Could we get a roll call, please, Beth?
Austin,
Yes.
Bertucci,
Yes.
Bilger,
Yes.
Dombrowski,
Yes.
Yes.
Dorfman,
Yes.
Feelick,
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so we
And then-
will allow whatever guest time to leave, and then we will call you guys back when